Hi, this is an unexpected launch, a show about stories and the people behind them. I'm speaking with people who've gracefully navigated unexpected life circumstances. These are stories of resilience, connection, and community. Stories of lives being reimagined, rewritten, and rebuilt. I'm Kirsten, and today's story is about Patti. Patty's a mom of four, and she's recently published her first book, When He Was Anna, A Mom's Journey into the Transgender World. This chapter of Patty's story began when her youngest daughter, Anna, announced at the age of 17 that she is transgender. Patty's husband explains in the foreword of her book that this book is about a parent's love and support for their child who now goes by Tristan. Patty, I appreciate your honesty in sharing the struggle, the heartache, and the trauma of discovering, loving, and supporting your transgender son. Patty, you and I share a passion, and that is sharing our stories so that people feel that they are not alone. And you start one of your chapters with a quote from Maya Angelou that I absolutely love and speaks so nicely to introducing our conversation today, and that is, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." Patty, welcome to an unexpected launch.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. I am so excited to be here. This is a little surreal for me, but yeah, thank you. I'm anxious to speak with you today.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive right in. And Patty, you are a mom of four children. I'd love to hear a little bit about your family of six.
Okay, my family of six. My husband and I have been married since 1987, so almost 34 years, long time. We have four children. They are all adults now. They range in age from 30 to 20, and our 20-year-old Tristan is a transgender male. And we also have a 3-year-old Maltipoo named Callie that rounded us out.
I'm sure she's one of the most loved members of the family.
Yes.
Well, speaking of Tristan, so throughout your book, it comes through that Tristan has always been passionate, focused, driven, independent, and an achiever, excelling at everything that he put his mind to. And
Yes.
prior to coming out as transgender, Tristan struggled in middle school and high school. And I wanted to know a little bit about that and how that impacted your relationship.
Sure. Middle school is tough, and I think that any parent who has had a child go through middle school would probably agree with me. Those years are, in my opinion, some of the most difficult parenting years that there are. Tristan's middle school years were especially hard because we watched this child that we had raised just change drastically. Tristan, the little girl, Anna, the little girl, was passionate about Girl Scouts and martial arts and Bon Jovi, classic rock. Bon Jovi was the favorite. Very outgoing, very much a leader from a very young age. And suddenly, middle school was an abrupt change. And we had been through middle school 3 times before, so we get it. We were not unrealistic in what we were looking for as far as the middle school experience. But suddenly we had this middle schooler who was very sullen, very depressed. Everything was very dark. And I mean that literally and figuratively. We went from selling Girl Scout cookies and going to martial arts classes to suddenly everything was about black clothes and black combat boots and very dark makeup and very dark hair color and music that was very dark, very indecipherable, the screaming heavy metal type music. And again, I realized that kids begin to express themselves at that age, and parents see changes, and we don't always agree with everything our kids do at that age. This was very much to the extreme. So we really watched our child become someone we didn't recognize at all. High school we thought would be better. And in a way, I think things got a little better in high school. Tristan joined the marching band, which, if there are any band parents who hear this, you understand that that's a lifestyle. It's not an extracurricular. It's a lifestyle commitment. And band was great because for us, we thought, okay, new beginnings. This will give Tristan a new set of friends, a new passion, a new focus. And Tristan has always been a very focused, passionate person. And band was great. Marching band was wonderful. But it still was a challenge. And it was a challenge for reasons you wouldn't expect. Tristan's greatest strengths, the passion and the dedication and the focus, it was almost too much. There was too much focus on band. There was too much passion about band. And we were fortunate as parents that we were able to be very involved. We were able to commit a lot of time. So we were able to stay close with Tristan and Tristan's friends. But there was just something in the background that still caused Tristan a lot of angst. We didn't know at the time that Tristan was struggling with a transgender identity. We just had no idea.
Right. Well, so taking that a little bit of a step back, so at age 17, you're in the car, you're driving with Anna,
Yes.
and she tells you that she's a transgender male, and she felt that her life up to that point had been a lie. So tell us what it's like knowing the backdrop of this struggle that's been going on in middle school and high school. What was it like to have this conversation and Anna share this with you?
We never saw it coming. And I say we, I speak for myself, but my husband and I, and our children, our three older children, this was not on the radar for any of us. And I was completely and totally blindsided. I didn't know what to say. I know I didn't say the right things because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand it. I did not know any transgender people. I'd never met a transgender person. And I was lost completely.
That was something that really came through in your book, is that struggle to understand, because you described Anna as a child, and the Girl Scouts and some of those girly things, and I really appreciated you sharing that struggle and that difficulty to accept in the face of sort of nothing that gave you that warning that might be
Yeah.
coming, or that's how Anna was feeling. Um, so you really you felt blindsided, and how did you process this I know it was definitely a journey and took time, but how did you process Anna being a transgender male?
Not very well. I think that I probably made every mistake, stumble that I could make at that point. A lot of denial. I think when we don't understand things, it's easy to deny those things, and that certainly was my first step. Was to say, no, there's no way. This isn't true. This is not a real thing here. Um, then when you start to process it, you search for things you've missed, and I can honestly say there's nothing that I can look back on in Tristan's younger days when Tristan was Anna. There's nothing I can look back on and say, oh, that's a sign that I missed. I totally completely missed that. I've looked for those signs. I've searched and they're just not there. So um, processing it was hard. And honestly, after 3 years, it's easier, it's better, but there's still a certain amount of mental angst, if you will, that creeps in from time to time.
I think one of the things that I've talked with so many guests about is that urge to be able to move on and be, come to sort of that sense of not closure but acceptance. And I think that it takes so much time, and this is something that I really want people to understand, that when they have somebody who's struggling with something, that there's no timetable, and that you could feel great about accepting it yesterday, but tomorrow you may wake up and be back sort of not to square one, but still sort of in that struggling. And it does take a long time, and it very much is a journey, and things continue to evolve.
Yeah, they do. And and I'm going to speak in the general term, but I think as parents generally, what do you want for your children? You want your children to be happy. You want your children to have a life that's the life that they want. And that certainly is the case for all of my four children. I want them all to be happy, and I want them to love their lives. And when this was all new for us, you know, no one was happy. Tristan wasn't happy. We weren't happy. We were all trying to deal with something that was just so foreign to all of us. And it was a challenge. And it certainly was very impactful on our relationship. Um, there was Tristan is a very determined person and very focused. And there was a time early on when, in the very, very early days, when Tristan came to us and said, I'm a transgender male. And oh, by the way, starting now, call me Lucas. Tristan had chosen the name Lucas for a short time. Call me Lucas and use male pronouns. It was emotional whiplash. So there was no time to ease into this for us. Tristan had time to process this. We had to rip off a Band-Aid, and it was just a shock.
Well, and you write that during this period, your relationship with Tristan becomes volatile and explosive and strained. And you're struggling, Tristan is struggling, and you're both struggling for different reasons. Yet at the end of the day, your family, you love each other. How did you continue to navigate the explosiveness of your relationship?
So it's a big question. And I could probably, write another book about that. We did the best we could. It was trial and error. We really, again, we struggled because there we were with this child, and not a child, but this teenager, this 17-year-old that, we loved desperately, that was going through such a terribly emotional time. At the same time, we were going through a terribly emotional time. And there was so much anger. And Tristan at age 17 was just filled with anger. And that came out toward us, towards the parents.
Yeah.
Again, any parent of a teenager probably says, yeah, I know what you're talking about. That happens. The problem with that is, for me, and I said this to Tristan, and I said to Tristan many times, the type of behavior that we're expected to tolerate here in our home is behavior I would never tolerate from a stranger. So if a person walked in my door and spoke to me the way that you're speaking to me, I'd show them the door and tell them to leave. Of course, we didn't do that with Tristan, but I said, why would I tolerate this from my child when I wouldn't tolerate this from anybody else in the world? And so it got to the point where this was not a transgender thing. This was a human relationship thing. And so we had to all get on the same page where, there are certain behaviors that are just not acceptable. And, it doesn't matter how you identify. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your orientation. It just doesn't matter. What matters is you have to be polite and respectful. And it goes both ways.
Right. Right. Well, and in fact, as we've been talking about, there were a couple of times that you reacted in a way that you acknowledged was poor, and you had some regrets. And I truly believe that in the moment we are doing the best that we can. And it's with time and reflection and 2020 hindsight that we might have acted differently in the moment, but we don't have access to that in that moment. And so, in that vein, there are going to be people who are listening who find themselves in your shoes. What advice do you have for a parent who's navigating an untenable situation with their child?
Another tough question. I am not a parenting expert. I'm not a relationship expert. I'm a mom who has worked through some pretty tough things. I will tell you that I believe any parent who has parented for more than about 6 months probably understands that there are going to be some reactions that you have that you wish you hadn't had. There are going to be some things that you say and do that you wish you had not said or done. And I would challenge any parent to negate that.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think that for me and for a lot of parents, we strive for perfection that is completely unattainable. For me personally, I felt like I had to be the perfect parent. My kids deserve the perfect mom, and anything less than that was just unacceptable. That's such a mistake. It's such a mistake because we can never live up to that. So I think parents need to give themselves a pass sometimes. You'll learn from your mistakes. Like you said, hindsight is 2020. The important thing is that we learn and that we're trying to do better. And if you're like me, a lot of the mistakes you made, hopefully most of the mistakes you made, were made out of trying and out of love for your child, especially when you're navigating something that is so foreign to your family. But also at the same time, not to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but it's okay to have non-negotiables. It's okay for things in your family to be the things where you say, okay, I draw the line here. For us, I just mentioned, for us, it was being polite and respectful, being able to have a conversation without screaming at each other, being able to listen to someone else's opinions or points of view. And that to me is for a non-negotiable. So it's okay. It's okay to draw that line in the sand sometimes and say, okay, no matter what, this is how we're expected to behave.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that perspective. And, I think that what people really want to hear is from moms who've been through the situation and who have a pearl of wisdom to share, because we all find ourselves, particularly when we're parenting teenagers, there are moments that every parent is going to regret. And we do it out of love, and we do it out of thinking that we are doing the best thing for our child in that moment. But again, it's not until we reflect back that we think, maybe I would have done that
Yeah,
differently. But you don't know
for
at the
sure.
time. And so I think we all, as parents, and any relationship really, we need to give ourselves grace. And we need not to have so much regret, but learn. And then, as you say, apply that to the next time, and continue to evolve. So, one of the things that you talk about in your book that I so related to was your challenges in navigating the mental health system. Anybody who's tried to navigate the mental health system, particularly for a child, knows that we are woefully inadequate
Yes.
in the United States. And do you have any tips for a parent who might be entering into navigating this system for their child, who's seeking that help that is so desperately needed, but the right kind of help for their child?
Sure. The biggest challenge that we faced, and I do think this is a common challenge, and I'm going to use my family as an example. We needed a specialist for Tristan in gender dysphoria because that was what Tristan needed help dealing with. And by Tristan's own admission, this was not forced therapy. This was, an acknowledgement in our whole family that Tristan really needed some help and support to navigate this. The problem that we found, again, I think this is very common. You search for a therapist who is a specialist in gender dysphoria, and you probably find a few in your given locality. And chances are they're not taking new patients. So you continue the search, and you find a practitioner or therapist who is taking new patients. But the likelihood that they're an expert in, for us, gender dysphoria, very low likelihood of that. So then you have to make a decision. What do you do? And of course, you want to help your child. And so you get an appointment with that practitioner who is not necessarily a specialist in the area that you need, but they're taking new patients, right? And as harsh as it sounds, you adopt the, well, this is better than nothing mentality. So you go, and if you're fortunate, there's a relationship that develops. It's a positive relationship, and so you feel like, again, in our case, your child is getting some benefit from this person, and they're helping. So you continue down that road. Well, then 6 months, 9 months, 12 months later, you get the phone call that the person that's a specialist in the area that you really needed has openings for new patients. Well, by that point, yeah, you have a child who's seen this person for a year, maybe, and they've established a relationship. You can't just sever that and say, okay, guess what? We're going to go here now. It just doesn't work that way. So that's a tough one. What I wish I had done early on, I wish that I had, well, two things. Okay. One is unrealistic. I wish I had been able to have a conversation with several different therapists before we ever, had any real interaction, just to kind of see who's a good fit for our family. But you don't do that because you get an appointment and you feel so fortunate you take that appointment. Right? You go and you're happy that you could have that appointment. So that's number one. That's not realistic for most people. Wish I'd been able to do that. But what I really wish I'd done, I wish that I had shared what I needed with some of the people that I'm close to. There is still such a stigma for so many people to let other people know that you or someone in your family needs therapy, that you need help working through something. And the reality is, if you share this with the people that you're closest to, chances are, number one, they won't judge you. And number two, you're probably going to get a pretty good referral. And I learned that after it was too late. By the time I was ready to open up and share with some of my closest friends and get some names, we were very much ingrained in another direction.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think for so many of us, it is, and this goes back to that being that perfect parent, because we don't only want to be the perfect parent for our children, we want to be viewed as the perfect parent amongst our community. So we're ashamed of admitting that our child is in crisis and we need help. And once you started sharing with your friends your family's experience, how did that feel to you to be able to share that and be open and honest and vulnerable?
It was great. I mean, there was a burden that was just lifted. And it's interesting, the disparity of things that came my way. I had one friend who, this is even in my book, there's a chapter in the book called No One's Perfect. And it's about dinner I had with a friend, and shared with her what was going on in my family, and that I was in the midst of writing this book. And the first thing out of her mouth was, "You're not using your real name." I said, "Sure. How can I promise a book that's no BS if I don't use my real name?" And she said, "Well, you can't, because You've spent your whole life trying to make people think you're perfect. And I was so taken back by that because I didn't think I'd spent my whole life trying to make people think I'm perfect. But she thought I had, and she'd known me for over 20 years. And so that was a hard thing to hear, but I needed to hear it. And it caused me to sort of sit back and reassess, what I put out there in the world. But then the other extreme is suddenly when people found out what we were going through, I start getting these messages, text messages, emails, Facebook private messages, some people that I knew barely, some people that I thought I knew pretty well. And they began to share with me their experience with a family member in a similar situation. Maybe a child that was transgender, or a sibling, or a niece, a nephew. And again, some of these people I knew very well. I had no idea that this was in their life because we don't talk about things.
Right. Well, conversations about sexuality are generally speaking uncomfortable. And I have to imagine that once you started opening up your own family and those around you started opening up, the richness of the connection that you create is so much more meaningful. And you can really openly share the struggles that you're going through. And there's something so comforting in knowing I am not the only person who is
Right.
struggling with this. And the feelings that I'm having are normal. These are normal feelings that other people who are going through this situation, and if you don't share or you don't hear other people's experiences, you feel very isolated, and that your experience is so unique, and that you're doing it wrong, or you're
Right.
not reacting in the right way. And so there's something so beautiful, and this is why I do this podcast, is that I think that people can listen to stories, and it doesn't matter the circumstance, but they can see a little sliver of themselves in somebody else's story. And that creates that spark of hope. And so I'm so appreciative that you're openly sharing your experience, Patty, because I think it's so valuable for other people to hear it.
I appreciate that. And one of the reasons that, and there are many reasons why I ended up um, with a book, but one of the big reasons, the reason I even started in the first place to write down my thoughts, my feelings, I'm a researcher, and just by nature, it's just what I do. If I want an answer, I start looking for the answer. So when we started to face this with Tristan, what do? You buy books, you go to the internet, you do your searches, you go to social media, all the things that we do, in this modern age. And I struggled to believe, with everything I read and all the research I did, I struggled to believe that there was not another person out there that I could find that thought and felt the way that I did. But I couldn't find it. It was one extreme or the other. People either extreme advocates, or extreme opposition, one or the other. Nobody was talking about, well, this is what it feels like as a parent when this impacts your family. This is it, the raw, honest truth. Here it is. And I don't sugarcoat things in the book. I mean, again, it's very emotional, and it's pretty raw, and it's my story. But somebody had to tell it in an unpolished manner.
Well, what I appreciate about your story is that it is raw, it is real. You don't sugarcoat it. And frankly, that's what people are looking for. People in your situation aren't looking for the sugar-coated. They want a roadmap. And so I appreciate that you were very open in your struggles, and clear your love for your family just absolutely shines through. And I think it's so important that you approached it in that way of just honesty, because that's the only way it's going to be helpful to somebody. If you presented your your journey through this in a sugar-coated way. Somebody picks up your book and they are struggling, their relationship is explosive, they're just going to think, gosh, I'm not doing this correctly.
Right.
And so that's where being real about the really crappy stuff that we go through is so important. So I really appreciated that. And I have to share with you that I found one of the passages in your book so poignant. And you're writing about the family portrait that is hanging in your bedroom. And this portrait depicts Anna as a little girl in a pink dress. She looks like Anna, but she's not Anna, you write. She's not Tristan either. This child wearing pink sparkly shoes is not a little boy. So I imagine the complexity of the emotions that you must have. And I'd love to know what gives you strength on those days when you're feeling confused and exhausted and uncertain.
Fortunately, those days are becoming less and less. We're 3 years into this now, and there were an awful lot of those days in the beginning. The biggest thing for me has been a very, very strong marriage, which I am so fortunate to have, and I understand what a blessing that is, because not everyone has a partner that supports them completely. And so that's made a huge difference for us and in our family. I have a lot of faith, have a very strong faith. And I think that throughout the book, I think there's smatterings of that throughout the book as well. I think watching Tristan develop and grow, become a happier person, we're seeing that, become a very independent person, much more so than ever. Tristan's always been incredibly independent. We're seeing that even more as an independent young adult. That's probably been the best thing. It's just watching this evolution.
Well, and that really speaks to time.
Yes.
So folks who are in those early stages of the journey and are feeling frustrated, know that it won't be forever, and that it will just take some time.
No,
So
for sure.
as Tristan is progressing in his journey as a transgender male, he wants to begin male hormones and wants to have top surgery. And you share throughout the book that this was particularly difficult for you, for him to take these two steps. Um, can you tell us a little bit about why you struggled so much with these particular steps in his transgender journey?
Sure. Uh, You have to remember, so Tristan was literally turning 17. This announcement came right before the 17th birthday. So Tristan was a brand new 17-year-old. And I remember myself at 17, and I cannot imagine having to make decisions like that at 17. These are life-altering decisions. They're not, certainly not life-ending, but they're life-altering. And my fear was, and this maybe is a little selfish, but my fear was that at some point Tristan would come to me, and it could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and say, I was 17 and it was your job to help with the big decisions. And why did you let me make those big decisions? I was not equipped at 17 to make a life-altering decision. I certainly wasn't. And I struggle with anyone that age having to make such a decision. It's tough.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard as a parent because you're struggling with what you know from life experience. And when you're 17, you think that you sort of, know it all. But as a parent,
Yeah.
and you look back, you realize how young 17 is. So Tristan does decide to move forward with male hormones and starts to begin looking more male. So you've been dealing with sort of the psychological aspects, but what was it like to start to witness Tristan's physical transformation?
It's hard. Tristan was Anna, who is when I was pregnant all 4 times, that was when you learned the gender of the baby when you were pregnant. So, I knew that I was pregnant with a girl early on, and Anna Marie was named Anna Marie very early on. So, at that point, I'd had about 17 and a half years of Anna, and she was a girly girl. There are so many things in Anna, the little girl's childhood, that were so feminine that to see the little girl, as you referenced, in the pink dress and the pink sparkly shoes, look very much like a male. um, it's still hard. You know, you get more used to it, and it's not shocking because it's the same person.
Right.
You know, Tristan's the same person, but the appearance certainly is different, and so it's hard.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So I know that before you published your book, you had Tristan's approval. Has Tristan provided any feedback about the book or his experience with you sharing the story?
Yes. So when I first started to write, it was very much therapy, and that was the reason that I started to write. I needed something that would help me, because as a parent, you want to help your child. Well, you can't help your child if you're struggling yourself. So I needed to figure out what it was that would help me, and for me personally, writing was the thing. And at some point, I realized, you know what? You're not the only one. We talked about that. This thing could be a book. So that's the path that I took, and I had actually finished the book. Really hadn't done anything with it. It was a file on my computer. So Tristan and I were together, just kind of hanging out one day, and I hadn't decided whether to share the book or not. And Tristan sort of opened the door. I don't remember what the conversation was, but sort of opened the door for that. And I said, well, I've done something I want to tell you about. And so there was that curiosity, and I shared one thing with Tristan. I said, when you're ready to read the book, let me know. I'd love your input. But before you read it, you need to know one thing, and that is that there are parts of the book where you look like a complete brat, and there are parts of the book I look like a complete ass. So it's equal opportunity fender for both of us. Let me know when you want to read the book. So about a week later, I get this text message, because that's what we do. We text, right? And the text says, okay, send me the book. So I sent the book, and I said, this is for your eyes only, because I want your feedback only. So Tristan read the book, and at the end of all of this, Tristan's feedback was, this is almost a direct quote, the book was really well written. I think you should publish it.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you, for a mom, it's pretty high praise,
Yeah.
because I think that our kids can be our biggest critics.
Oh boy, that's for sure.
And they don't typically hold it back. If they can find fault, they typically do. So that was pretty important. If Tristan had any hesitation about the book, about the title of the book, about anything, the book would have stayed on the computer in a file, and it never would have gone anywhere. It would have been just great therapy for me, and that's it.
Well, that is such a seal of approval to go from the relationship that you had to that endorsement. I think should make you feel very proud, and I'm personally very happy that that was his reaction,
Yes.
so that your book could come forward.
Thank you.
So, what is your relationship with Tristan today?
we're actually in a really good place. And it's funny because that's a question I hear a lot from people that read the book, because the book was a 2-year chronology. So it was a snapshot really of the first 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, we were certainly in a different place than we are now. We were, I think we were still struggling, all of us. And so now we're a little over 3 years and we're good. We're communicating very often. Tristan doesn't live at home anymore, hasn't for a couple of years. That's the age. We text all the time, which again, that's what we do now. You know, we don't pick up the phone and call, we text. But we do call sometimes. But so we're in communication, you know, at least several times a week. So I think pretty often for a mom and a 20-year-old, I think that's pretty much on
Yeah,
par.
I think that's great.
Yeah, see each other, you know, not every day, but because we don't live, you know, close to each other, that close. You know, we're a county or two away, but see each other regularly. And I think the best thing that I can say right now about how we've evolved as far as our relationship is we can get together without being angry. Yeah, we can get together, we can have dinner, we can have conversations, we can laugh, and we can walk away from that evening together, not exhausted from arguing. And that's a real accomplishment for us.
Yeah, that has to feel amazing because I know that there are a couple of years where it didn't feel quite as easy.
It was tough. Yeah, there were some tough years.
Yeah. So it was your lifelong dream to write a book. This may not have been the story you thought that you were going to be telling, but I'd love to hear how writing the book and putting yourself out there, how has that impacted you?
It's been pretty significant. I'm a fixer, I'm a changer. So I approach everything with, oh, how can I fix this? How can I make this better? How can I change it? This whole process of learning to deal with something, learning to accept something that I originally thought, oh, I need to change this, I need to fix it, has been, as I mentioned, this is therapy for me. The cool part is having so many people reach out to say, oh, I had no idea. I learned so much from this. And again, the story's not, it wasn't written to educate. It was written as a memoir. So to have people say, I had no idea. You know, either I had no idea your family was going through this, or I had no idea about any of these things that you shed light on in your book. So to have people step forward and say, wow, this was helpful for me, has been very, very impactful. And I look forward to more of that in the future, because I think, as you have said, a couple of times, this is how we help people. We share our stories and let people know that there's somebody else out there that's facing the same or a very similar struggle.
Mhm.
And there's comfort in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned you're a researcher, and when you want to find something out, you go look for those resources. What resources were most helpful for you?
There were a lot. So I'll just sort of share, sort of the directions that I took. Obviously, we live in a world of everything on the internet, which can be wonderful and it can be awful, but there's so many resources there. It's a little overwhelming. I did a lot of research, read a lot of books from different perspectives. So a lot of books that took a very favorable, supportive stance, and I read some books that didn't take a favorable, supportive stance. My hope being that my book was just a neutral, balanced account of, again, my experience. But the reading was very helpful, and again, it can be overwhelming. There's so much. Local support groups. There are some local support groups. Obviously, COVID's impacted, for the last year or so, all of that. But Sharing with friends has been, very helpful, very impactful. Really, for me, I can't point to one thing and say, okay, that's the one thing that really, was the best thing. Traditional therapy, we did some of that. Tristan, obviously has been much more involved with that. We were at one point. It was just a combination. For me, it was just piecing together, okay, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we'll put together sort of a package that works for you. And for me, ultimately, it came down to how I chose to provide my own therapy, really, at the end of the day.
Mhm. So it's been a journey. What are some of the beautiful gifts that have come throughout this journey?
So I'll start with the most superficial and selfish is I published a book. It was number one on my bucket list. I never in a million years thought that would be my topic. But it was, and it happened. So that was, again, very, very, very superficial, but that's a pretty cool thing because it's something I've always wanted to do. Having people come to me again, now I've mentioned this, having people come to me and say, "Hey, I'm in this boat." Finally, somebody said what I was thinking, said what I felt. That's pretty cool. But and again, I think I've mentioned this, watching Tristan evolve into a confident, independent young adult has been pretty cool part of the journey.
Yeah, I love that. So, Patty, what's your greatest hope?
Another big question.
I don't go for the easy ones.
You don't go for the easy ones. So let's since this is about the journey that our family has been on with our youngest child, I will tell you my greatest hope for Tristan, and that is that Tristan's life is filled with happiness, and that Tristan is surrounded with people who provide joy and who are non-judgmental.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Well, Patty, this has been phenomenal. It's just been such a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to meet with you, to read your book, to share your story. Is there anything that you and I haven't touched upon yet that you would like people to know?
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for providing this forum. It's wonderful so that people like me can share with others how they've dealt with things that sort of blindsided their family. So I do appreciate that. The one thing I'd like to share that's become very important to me, when I was preparing for my book signing, I had to come up with a very short, simple phrase that I could write over and over and over that sort of summed up the entire experience in just a few words,
Wow.
which was a challenge. But I did that, and I came up with something that I'm very happy with, and I'd like to share that with you. So here it is. You can call it my motto, my catchphrase, whatever you want to call it. And it's this: the struggle is real, and so is the love.
Hmm. That's perfect. I
Thank
love
you.
that. That's beautiful. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
I'd like to conclude our conversation with another quote from your book, and I thought it was a perfect way for us to end our conversation. Go and love your children exactly as they are, and then watch them become the truest and most wonderful versions of themselves. All they need, all anyone really needs, is to feel loved and appreciated for exactly who they are. Thank you for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe, and tell a friend about the Unexpected Launch podcast. Doing so helps to make sure that our stories are reaching those who need encouragement and hope. And for those of you who'd like to view our videos, please visit the Unexpected Launch channel on YouTube. Thank you.